Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where having a rowing coach only makes you better. Following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident rower who is respected by your peers. You can become the athlete you want to row with. I'm Rebecca Caroe, and I'm joined by Marlene Royle.
Hello, Rebecca, and hello to our Faster Masters Rowing audience.
Very happy to be back with everybody this week. How's your week been, Marlene?
Good. We've been doing some of our Faster Masters background work, preparing articles and things that we like to share when people sign up for our advocacy page. So, we've been working on some content this week.
Yes, if anybody's interested, go to fastermastersrowing.com/advocacy and you can sign up to receive an article a month, which you can put into your club newsletter just as a gift from us. And we're also going to be sending them through to Row Trade, which is the Australian rowing. It's not really a magazine. It's more of a kind of listings PDF thing. Anyway, so they'll be coming through for March and April later on this year. We've also been featured in Row 2K this week. So you may remember a couple of weeks ago, we announced the State of Masters Rowing survey was published, and Row 2K have put it on their features. So if you are a habitual reader of that wonderful website, please go and have a look, and you can see the whole report listed there. And we've got a forward announcement. Last week, we mentioned that we're going to be speaking at the US Rowing Masters Conference, and a few folks messaged us afterwards going, I can't find any information. And we realized, although we've been signed, we'd slightly jumped the gun. We now have the full URL if you were interested in joining. You don't have to be a US Rowing member. You don't even need to be a master. And the URL is 2022 US Rowing Masters Conference .shed, which is SCHED, like it's short for schedule.com. So shed.com. And I'll put that in the show notes as well. And Marlene, what are you talking on?
I am talking about aging well and rowing well as you age. So I'm going to be talking about ways that we can continue to improve our technique as we age, and our mobility changes, joints changes. We have changes in our muscle tissue and our strength, and how to manage those changes, as well as some technical tips for joint protection and ways that you can take care of your joints and improve your technique at the same time.
And I'm also talking, and my speech is about how to organize a master's group for your club. And I'm going to be going into the kind of decisions you need to make at the outset and your strategy, and then the practical downstream implications for that. What that means for if you have masters with different training goals, if you have a racing group and a training group and a learn to row group, and how to manage the flow within and between them. I'm also going to be covering off what to do if you do not have a coach, or if you do have a coach, or you have a coach that's only there some of the time, and ways to keep the group engaged and motivated. So that's quite a lot of stuff, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's great. So I'm talking about things in the boat, and Rebecca's talking about things in the boathouse. So
that's cute.
You
should do social media for us. I think you could make a really...
No. It is definitely not my talent. I'm a scientist.
Fancy that.
Boring. So...
Now, the podcast this week is sponsored by the Aging Well webinar. How to know if your chronological and biological ages are diverging. We talk to two experts who study the science of aging and the science of longevity, which are not the same thing. And we talk about interventions that you can make in your own lifestyle to assist your aging and to get the outcomes that you desire, rather than necessarily the ones that life is going to be throwing at you. Now, this is a Faster Masters Rowing hosted webinar, and you can get all of the details by going to fastermastersrowing.com/register/aging-well. And I'll also put that note in the show notes. And the event is on the 15th of March. So it's in 1 week. We are recording it as usual. So even if you can't make the scheduled time, please don't worry, buy a ticket. And pretty much within a couple of hours of finishing the entire live webinar, Marlene and I have the recording up in the learning management system. So you can watch it on demand kind of whenever you're ready and come back to it as often as you like. That's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah. Both our speakers are very, very good and very dynamic. So I think I'm looking forward to it too. I think we all need all the tips that we can get.
Exactly. And it's so clear to me that aging is very different for different people. Someone said to me a while ago, how old do you think I am? And we were on a Zoom call. So this is my excuse, is that it wasn't very clear, and twice it happened. And once I said 42 and she was 38, and once I said 58 and she was 60. So that just goes to show.
Yeah, I'm terrible at predicting ages. I really, sort of within a few decades, everybody looks the same to me, and I've never really been able to like guess and nail it, and there's so many factors which we're going to learn about, and as we said, everything that helps us live better, healthier, easier, happier, we'll take all the advice we can get.
Yeah, definitely to be welcomed. Take a look at my glorious photograph of the week. This is coastal rowing in Tinos, from Tinos Andronikos. So I don't know whether that's his name and whether Tinos is actually a place, but it's definitely in Greece, and it just looks glorious. So thank you for sharing that photo, Tinos.
Yes.
Our topic for this podcast is the athlete-coach relationship. Now, if you're watching us live, you can ask questions or put your own comments underneath the live stream in the comments box. And when we get the opportunity, we will come to your comments and we will read them out. And if they're questions, we will endeavour to answer them. Now, for masters, many of us work with coaches. As we discovered when we did the Masters Rowing Survey, a lot of people work with a coach at least once a month, even if that's just for one workout. Obviously, some of us have in-person relationships with our coaches. Some of us have remote or virtual relationships with our coaches. So, Marlene, let's kick off. How should or could an athlete work with their coach, and how should the coach then work with you?
Well, I think the first thing that you have to look at is what are the goals? What are the goals of the athlete? What are the goals of the coach? Are there similarities? Are there differences? What type of program are you in? Are you at a camp? Are you in a competitive program? Are you in a more fitness-oriented program, a more technically oriented program? So I think first of all, you have to look at what environment that you're in. But I think the main features of a successful athlete-coach relationship is developing trust and respect and understanding. I know certainly my experience in working quite a lot in camp situations where people come for a week or a weekend is understanding is communication and understanding right away what would they like to get out of the camp, or what would they like to get out of their private lesson. So I think good communication and respect is the first place to start.
It's quite interesting, isn't it, how different coaches really are very, very different. If you've come up through high school or university rowing, The general expectation is that the coach says, and you do, and you
Mhm.
don't question them, except perhaps to clarify your understanding. And yet, when you move along and you become a master's rower, whether you're experienced or not, it's very noticeable differences. And I think that's partly to do with your kind of life stage and your life experience.
Yes, absolutely. And when you think of high school rowing, juniors rowing, university rowing, most of the time that is also competitive rowing. So when you're in a competitive environment and the goal is to improve the team or to win races, the demands are different. The demands of a competitive program are different. So, a coach definitely imposes their standards, but it's also the role of the coach to develop the team culture and help the team develop the culture to have high standards of behavior and quality and how they train and what their responsibilities are. So I think the most successful coaches help the team create the momentum and the energy themselves. It's not necessarily a top down type of a system.
It was very noticeable when I lived in Cambridge and my husband was coaching on the boat race program. There were lots of athletes who came to Cambridge who were not from the UK. And it was very noticeable that the Europeans came and expected to have a relationship with the coach where they could ask questions and they could put their opinions forward. Whereas the ones that came from North America were horrified that you thought you could offer your advice to the coach. And they very much felt that they were receiving wisdom rather than offering it.
Interesting. Many years ago, I did an interview with Igor Grinko, and Igor coached three different national teams. He coached it was the former Soviet Union, but he was from Ukraine, so he coached in Ukraine. And on the Soviet team, he coached in China and he coached in the United States. And I did an interview with him at the Munich World Cup back in, I think it was like 2000, maybe 2001 or 2002. And he compared what it was like to work with the three different national teams and how different the athletes were. And actually, one of the things he had commented about was on the Chinese team, they were just waiting for instructions, and it was the type of system you did what the coach said and you didn't ask questions. He said actually the Americans challenged him more, asking,
Mhm.
why do we have to do this? They were more questioners, or
Mhm.
from this point of view. And in the Soviet system, of course, athletes they lived in camp situations, probably 325 days a year. So there was probably more of a holistic approach because they did live so closely together. It wasn't like people went home to their apartments. They were living in camp situation all the time. So it was also more based on how people were feeling, and adjusting the workloads, and more discussion back and forth. So it was very interesting.
Which brings us neatly to the sort of next part of this discussion of the athlete coach relationship, which is what boundaries are there to the relationship? And I'll kick off by telling a story about some friends who we were staying with who were both coaches. And during dinner one night, a phone call came through from one of the athletes, and one of them left the table and spent 45 minutes on the phone in clearly a very intense discussion with this particular athlete. And their choice was different than mine. I would not have accepted that sort of interaction in my own family private time. And that was my choice.
Mhm.
And boundary setting is, if anyone who's had kids knows that setting boundaries is an important part of teaching kids how to behave and what is and is not acceptable behavior. But actually, the same principles apply to the athlete-coach relationship.
Yes, I would think so. I think especially if you very much value your private time, and perhaps you have limited private time to be with your partner, you don't want that time to be interrupted. You want to make sure that that's set aside. But I think, again, this is where we go to the communication, and you have to be clear with each other of how do you communicate. Do you mind if somebody texts you at X hours or at such and such time? Do you have certain days off that are off from the team, that unless it's an emergency,
Yeah.
it's private time? And I think, I mean, honestly, I find that most of the time, certainly, I work with masters athletes most of the time. And I mean, I really do find that most of the time people are really quite respectful. But as in any situation, it just takes one high demand or one person who's more needy than other people, or more somebody who doesn't have that boundary. And I think you have to, you have to communicate what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, particularly if you're scheduling boatings or reserving boatings. You have to say, we want to know your schedule by Sunday night at 5 o'clock, not emailing your person who does your boat reservation at 8 p.m. on Sunday night saying that you want to row at 5 o'clock Monday morning, and those types of things. So there's certainly those types of rules of how you manage your team. But I do think things like keeping appointments and expectations of being on time for practice,
Oh, yes,
and
timeliness.
do you expect, you have to be clear about what time you're supposed to arrive and what time does the practice session start. If the practice or the class or the lesson is at 7, you don't arrive at 7. You arrive at 6:45 and your boat is on the water and you're ready to begin the lesson at 7. And these are things that sound really simple and common, but you'd be amazed how many times you have to repeat them. Arrive at the boathouse by this time. The class starts at this time. And, if somebody is perpetually late, you have to decide, what do you do about this? Do you ask them not to come? Do you ask them to go to a different session? Those are things that if it's disruptive to the class, these are things that you have to have a strategy or again communicate if it becomes an issue.
I think that you made a really good point there. And particularly in a club situation, it's not a bad idea to have these written down. So, this is what you can expect if you join the club. The challenge is if that's a change from what people are used to who are long-standing members. But if you are in a group that self-organizes, and so many masters groups do, it really helps if you can discuss together how you're going to do this. So you might say, we only have one session a month with the coach. How can we get the most from that? Maybe the thing to do is the week prior for the entire group to discuss what are the things that they would like the coach to focus on, so that ahead of time they get a list and say, Rebecca's working on this and Marlene's particularly struggling with that, or so-and-so wants to know if they've got better at this particular point, or as a crew, we're really finding that the boat isn't balanced at the finish, or whatever the thing is. So, if you can be practical and think, well, we want to maximize our output from the session. One way of doing that is briefing well ahead of time, and then maybe even printing that out and bringing it to the session so that the coach can have it in their pocket to refer to. Or things like, if they don't coach with you often, I like to give them the crew order, because some coaches love to call out the seat number. Others like to have the person's name. So, little things like that, I think you can be supremely helpful to a coach and make sure that you as a group feel everybody has got represented and got, out of it what they're hoping.
Yes, I think that's a really important point. And in coaching team boats, sometimes there are issues such as the crew has one outing every 2 weeks or every month. So that outing with the coach is quite valuable, and you don't want to waste time deciding what you're going to do. So I think the early planning is key to that. I think it's also understanding between the coach and the boat, what's the approach? Because sometimes there are discrepancies that a coach feels, I coach the whole boat. I'm watching the whole boat and I coach the whole boat. And they don't go to each seat and talk with the athlete individually and give them something to work on. I know this can be a great source of frustration for masters who are paying $25 a session, and then they don't get one personalized tip for themselves. The coach is giving them the overview of the boat, what the boat should work on. However, the athletes are expecting individual attention. And, this is something that I think that's something that happens quite common. A coach is coaching a group and the information's directed towards the group, and the individuals are looking for one thing that they personally can work on. So that's something I think should be part of determining what the athlete coach relationship is. If it's a situation where you don't have a coach very often, but even if you do, are people expecting one? I always think it's important to have one bit of feedback for each athlete per session.
Totally right. And that brings us on to how to give and receive feedback. So if I were coaching that group that you just described, and my preference is to coach the whole crew, one of the things that I sometimes do is during the on-water session where I'm coaching the whole crew, I shoot video on my phone, and then I give the individual feedback afterwards in the form of a commentary over the video. And you can then do that individually. So you can pick out and do, for a quad, you can do 4 little mini videos, the same video, but you talk to one athlete. Because I notice, particularly in masters, there are often sensitivities with people knowing other people are hearing their personal feedback.
Yes. Some people can be very sensitive to that, and they don't like to go to a group video session, even though you can learn so much about watching other people's videos. But I think that's a great way to give private feedback. And I also use that method too, that if I'm coaching singles and I'm in a motorboat, I will be I'll be videotaping them and will be coaching them as I'm recording that, and then I send them the video so that they have a reminder of what they're working on. I do think at the beginning of a session, it's important to ask it. Well, I'm approaching this right now from, say, coaching single scholars, or say a camp situation where they may be working with a few different coaches during the term of their camp. I kind of make it a rule to first ask them, what have you been working on? What are you currently focusing on? And then trying to build on that. And if they're at the point where they are successful, that they've made improvement, then they might be ready to move on to a different topic. If not, I will just try to build on what they're already working on and maybe give them a little bit different perspective. Well, why don't you try it this way? What this coach said, why don't you try it this way? Both the same goal, but see which one works better for you. And, because I think it's important, if somebody's working on something, not to deviate and go off on a different tangent when they're maybe really focused on that. Or maybe they came to camp to learn how to do one thing better. And it's important not to put in there what you want them to do better, but find out what they're working on. And then if you have to, you can work your way around and get to the topic you want. But I think you have to put the athlete first in this situation.
That's a great point. And then I'm going to back that with what to do at the end of the session. So at the end of the session, I gather athletes around on the bank once we put the boats away, and I ask them each for something that was good and something to improve on. And I let them again vocalize the things that they think are good for themselves. And it doesn't matter if they were crew boats or not. It helps me to see the bits that they focused on and felt important to them. But then I can then also use that as a teaching point for the entire group if I think it's something that is more universal that we could all learn from. The homework element, and where I like to back it up, is to use videos of good rowing as something for people to watch afterwards. So if they can watch themselves and then watch someone who's more skillful than themselves, and I have 2 or 3 videos that I have on file where they've been videoing elite athletes in slow motion. So particularly side view in a single scull, looking at body positions, looking at hand positions, looking at elbow heights and sequencing. That can be particularly helpful because most phones, mine has a feature where I can do a slow motion video. So I can literally take 3 strokes and it films them in slow motion. Sadly, when you upload them to YouTube, YouTube doesn't have that feature, but it has a separate slow motion option, which you just need to make sure that people know where the settings are for you to do the playback speed. But I do think that that helps people to say, okay, compare and contrast. What do I look like? What does good rowing look like?
Exactly. And I think when you're giving feedback, another point that's very important is separate the individual's identity from the skill. So this sometimes can be, if somebody is a little bit self-conscious or a little bit self-critical, for example, they can take criticism or feedback very personally, maybe sometimes too personally. And I think it's important that the coach word feedback in a way that is based on the skills. We're looking for the blade to be vertical at this point. Then if there were a couple of strokes where that didn't happen, you can say, well, your blade was almost vertical, but it wasn't quite vertical. So, just focus on the position of the blade. And it isn't taken in a way that, well, you're not doing this. You are not doing this correctly. It should be we're looking for the blade to be feathered at this point, or we're looking for it to be square, and then bring the attention to that happened simply because the blade wasn't in the position we're looking for at this moment. And I think it's important to define those skills rather than make it seem as if it's the individual's fault that that's happening. It's not. It's a skill that, the blade is in this position and it needs to be in this position. So let's look at it and let's try to work on the steps to get the sequence correct. And maybe we have to back up a few steps and review that or check hand position or whatever. But I think it's important to isolate it from a skill point of view and be clear of what you are looking for as a coach.
As an athlete, when I am receiving feedback, I always try to be open-minded, accepting that there are both stylistic differences in how people row, which we have talked about many times, but also practical things. Different coaches tend to focus at different things. If you have a group of coaches all standing on the riverbank, one will be a power person, one will be a finishes person, one will be a recovery person. Where do you start in the stroke cycle to fix things is a question I love to ask, because I know my preference and different people have different preferences.
Yes.
And so even if I don't think I'm particularly bad at something, or I disagree with that as a starting point, I try to be very respectful to the guidance I'm being given and to do my best to make the change that they're asking for.
Yeah, and that from an athlete's point of view, is a very good skill, and we call that coachability. And even if it may not be something that you integrate all the time in your particular style, by trying a method that another coach suggests, you might get a light bulb in another direction and go, oh, all right, well, I never connected those two things, but the drill he just had me do, or the drill she just had me do, connected that little gap that I wanted to close that gap. And maybe the coach didn't know that they closed that gap, but they had you do an exercise that was a little bit different, that gave you a little bit different feedback. Or if you're a pretty intuitive athlete, you're working on these things. And we've talked about this a lot, of coaches who describe what they want to see, but they don't necessarily give you the tools of how to get there. So there are tools there are coaches who rely on the athlete's intuition to solve the problem. And then there are coaches who guide you a little bit more in saying, okay, well, let's use this as a reference point and go practice this with this reference point. So, there are different coaching philosophies, and between a coach and an athlete, if you have a coach who's relying on the athlete being completely intuitive, and the athlete is very concrete and wants to know, well, where should my shoulders be? They need help. You have to balance this relationship. So that's where the communication comes in.
Yeah,
demonstration.
That's really, yeah. And then at the end, when you're not in the boat, giving feedback. I sometimes ask for feedback on the water. I sometimes give feedback. Sometimes if we're in a crew, we try and make sure that everyone has a chance to say something. Our coxswain often says, "What's happening in the sharp end?" When you come off the water, I think it's important, if you are an experienced athlete, it's important in terms of leadership for your group that you give the coach really positive feedback on what they said that worked for you or for the crew as a whole. And that is also a really useful role in the athlete crew coaching relationship.
Yes, 100%. And if you don't understand something, I think we've all had coaches ask us to do things, and we're not always sure how do we fill those shoes. But I think there's another technique as well, where there are coaches who coach while the boat is rowing, and there are coaches who let the crew execute, and when they stop, then they give their coaching instruction, and then the boat rows, and they don't interrupt the boat when they're rowing. So there are different methods of that. El Moro often from Canada often talked about the fact that I would give the crew discussion, we'd have the feedback, but when they rowed their piece, that he was being silent, and then when they stopped and they were taking a break or turning around, that's when he would give his instruction or get his feedback. But he wanted them to focus while they were in the middle of the piece, and he didn't want to interrupt them. So, different methods, and you as an athlete might like to be talked to. Some people can't focus on things when somebody's talking to them. So, again, that's where the communication comes in.
I had a wonderful coach in the UK who had a pretty lousy British sense of humor, which means it was extremely good and very quirky. And his preference was to coach each athlete as early as possible during the outing, so that we were all in singles, so he could get round the group. And I loathed this. I wanted to warm up and get to a point where I felt that I was ready to work hard before I received the coaching. And so we had this game of cat and mouse where I would try and hide him. I would try and be first on the water, so that I was so far in front that he would wash everyone else down in trying to catch me. And we did have words about it, and we both understood the other's point of view, but sometimes one of us had to give way, and sometimes the other had to give way. I wanted him to see me when I was rowing at my best. That was my motivation.
I know. Well, it's like that. It's like that. If you're in charge of video recording the group, somebody's got to be first. And they're like, no, I'm not warmed up. And then it's like, we're like, listen, it doesn't matter. Really, it really doesn't matter. Just, but yes, there definitely is that element. And then there's the people who are at the end of the group and they're like, oh, I'm so tired. Now I'm tired. You're rowing when you're tired, but I don't know, you have to balance it. So, what we would try to do is make sure whoever was at the end of the group was at the beginning of the recording the next session, and we tried to, we really did try to balance it out. So you don't have the same person who's the last person 3 days in a row. Right. So.
Absolutely. One of the things about that boundary setting is also to explain, particularly if you're on a coach boat and you're coaching a large group of small boats, is to explain to them, if you want coaching, drop back and come close to the coach boat. I can't coach you if you're 200 yards away in the distance. And little things like that are really quite helpful. So that if someone does not want coaching, I don't mind. That's cool. Go and have a session doing the things the way you want to do them. And if you don't complain that you didn't get coached, if you are too far away and that the coach doesn't want to wash down everybody else as they pass them in order to get close to you.
Oh, absolutely. That is one of my absolute pet peeves, that somebody wants coaching, but then they're over there way in the middle of the lake, like 400 meters away from anybody else. And well, how do you expect me to get there when I've got 5 people over here and you're over there, So I'm totally with you. And that is part of running your team practice, whether you've got 2 8s or 2 quads, or you're running 4 pairs, or you've got 5 singles. They have to understand where they're supposed to be relative to each other, and they have to work together. And running small groups is a real skill for a coach. I think to be successful at running small groups, and particularly competitive pieces, and teaching athletes how to cooperate and how to get level during rest periods, not just to row away so that, you're starting the piece all by yourself. And, that takes a lot of skill and management on the water.
It does. That's a whole topic for another day.
Yes.
Well, thank you for sticking with us for Faster Masters Rowing Radio. This is the show dedicated to masters athletes who want fun, fitness, and confidence in their rowing. You can become a student of the sport by buying a Faster Masters Rowing Program subscription today. Go to fastermastersrowing.com/join. And we look forward to seeing you this time next week.
Yes. And remember to join the webinar.
Yeah, aging well.
Next
we all
Tuesday.
need it.
Yep.
We are all aging.